According to this article published back in 2015, autoimmunity affects 3 to 5% of the entire population. And I think it would probably be fair to say that number has increased within the last 8 years. But let's just assume, even at 5%, that's almost 400 million people. And hopefully I'm wrong, but I don't think that autoimmunity is going away anytime soon. Autoimmunity is when antibodies are developed against a specific human tissue protein. An antibody is basically just the X that marks the spot. It's the garage sale sign that you put in your yard that says, please come over and buy all of my junk. Now, think about this. Just because you place that sign in your yard doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to come over and buy anything from you. The same thing applies to antibodies. Just because you have these antibodies all over the place doesn't mean that your tissues are actually being destroyed at that present moment. This is an important concept because oftentimes when we run labs on a patient, it can be a little frightening when an antibody level comes back at 500 when the reference range is 0 to 10, for example. If the range is 0 to 10, whether the antibody levels come back at 50, 500, or 5,000 doesn't tell you the level of destruction or the level of autoimmunity. In fact, in some cases, the higher the number is actually protective. It simply means that your immune system is tagging certain tissues. And many autoimmune patients are told that they just have this incurable condition and that they will continue to worsen, and that the only thing they can do is manage it with medication, despite the literature being very clear that diet, nutrition, and lifestyle changes can make a profound difference in these patients. Although it is true, autoimmunity is an incurable condition, but it can be put into remission, meaning you can live with greatly reduced symptoms, possibly even no symptoms at all, and most importantly, you can stop or greatly reduce the tissue destruction that is also seen with autoimmunity. Autoimmunity is generally broken down into two classes. You have organ-specific and systemic. The key feature of systemic autoimmunity is that the immune system is attacking a tissue protein that is found in multiple tissues. For example, with lupus, the target protein is DNA, and every cell in your body has DNA. And as you can imagine, that makes the prognosis of a systemic autoimmune disease just not quite as splendid, especially when the target protein is DNA. Not saying that there aren't things that we can do, but it definitely becomes a little bit more difficult. When looking for autoimmunity, most traditional primary care providers will utilize what's called an ANA panel, if they even screen for it at all. But just like we talked about when it comes to antibody levels, maybe you've had this test ran and it came back negative. That doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have autoimmunity, because we also have organ-specific autoimmunity. Organ-specific meaning that you have antibodies towards a specific gland, like your thyroid, for example. Also important to understand is that once you have the presence of one autoimmune disease, like Hashimoto's, for example, with the thyroid, you now have a higher likelihood of more than one. You have to go and find the rest, whether that be Addison's disease with your adrenal glands, or rheumatoid arthritis with your joints, or type 1 diabetes with your pancreas. I've read studies stating that there are more than 80 different autoimmune diseases. And I've also read other ones claiming that there are over 100. Either way, there's a lot. And truthfully, some of them we can't screen for, at least as of today. But how does this even happen? How does one actually get autoimmunity? Well, there are two prerequisites for developing an autoimmune disease, and those are a genetic susceptibility and a trigger. It's this combination that leads to the progression of the disease and why it is so unique, because everyone could be exposed to, let's say, a pathogen in the air, but we all aren't going to develop an autoimmune disease. This is what makes managing this disease so hard, because there are no two autoimmune patients that are the exact same, even if they have the exact same disease. There are no silver bullets when it comes to managing autoimmunity. Also important to understand, when we say that one of the prerequisites is a genetic susceptibility, that doesn't necessarily mean that someone within your family actually had or even currently has an autoimmune disease. Your mother, for example, may have had the genetic predisposition for an autoimmune disease, but if she never was exposed to a trigger, that gene may have never actually been turned on. And when it comes to triggers, there's a whole host of them. If you're struggling with an autoimmune disease, or maybe you're just skeptical that you may indeed have one, I made a free PDF guide that you can download on our website. I'll put the link down below. You'll learn all about autoimmunity, all the possible mechanisms, and more importantly, how I actually think about managing these cases and working through a autoimmune case.